Well, welcome to my studio. I'm going to paint tulips. I've done a sketch. You can see it very lightly here. An open flower, another open flower, some closed flowers. And this sketch was done on top of a paper, 140-pound press paper, that had been put outside in sub-zero weather. And I had poured yellows and rose, opera rose, and some scarlets on the paper, leaving it for 24 hours outside on the porch with the hopes that I would get some texture and ice crystals. And there are some. I'll move the paper around a little bit. There are some. They're subtle. They're very, very subtle. Let's see if we can zoom in and see just a little bit better. But the texture is here, for example. Here there's some of the ice crystal texture. And also over here, there's some of the ice crystal texture, a little bit here. So I liked the background as a pour, and the added benefit of the ice crystals was really lovely. The issue then becomes, what color can I make my tulips? If we look at the color chart, the background is in this range of yellow to mid-orange, red-orange. But I'm not going to make my tulips blue and purple on the opposite side of the spectrum, or even bluish green. So I'm just going to go a little further and stick pretty much with the reds, red to violet, but with an emphasis on the rose tones of the red rather than a scarlet tone of the red. So that's what's going to happen with this painting, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm just going to test with one flower to begin, the color, and see how that works. And because I should be doing some yard chores today, but I like very much opera rose. Now, opera rose is an interesting color because it's so bright. It's so bright. But sometimes, as an underlying glazing, it really can perk up. So I don't have to really, if I use some opera rose and I stick with some glazes that involve that, and then I go with some glazes will be deeper colors, then, and of course I will tone down this with subsequent glazes, but I'm liking that for an initial glaze in some of these petals that are so intensely yellow or intensely, see, so that's going toward an orange, and that works for me. But it's an orange that has a lot of vivid color to it, because the opera rose is such a brilliant color. So I'm just going to leave some places where it's lighter, and do some places where it's darker. But I'm going to put an initial glaze in to a couple of flowers, and that will be, I think that will work out. Here I'm putting it in a little darker, And then I'm going to extend the color around. This is where it helps to really know your paints and how they behave. As an underlying wash, it's a very nice color. You wouldn't want it to be the final color because it's a bit almost fluorescent looking. It's so bright, but it can do wonders in a painting as an accent, and also to just change the hue. So that's good. I like it. And it's interesting because this flower looks very different than the one on the right, just because the underlying base coat has such a variation. So I'm just testing this color. I'm not going to do more now. Because what I really want to do is do this little test at the beginning and make sure that this is a little darker here, according to my sketch. There's some shadowing in here. So I'm just going to make it a little more intense there. And I've already done some shading here. All right, so I'm going to leave that and see how it dries. And then, since these flowers are all going to be on the red and rose, orange tendency with a little bit of dark added, I'll just see how it dries. One of the things that I might do, just so that there's not here I'm taking some water and I'm taking my very soft favorite scrub brush, and I'm just going to soften the edges a little bit of that part of the pour. It's very subtle, but I just want to, that's one of the aspects about the pour, is you've got to decide where you want to leave some of those marks and where you don't. It's where they would be a distraction. Like right here, this line is a little too strong in the middle of the flower. So I'm just going to reduce it, because I don't want to have to use a lot of heavy paint going over that. Just to even it out a little bit. So let's see if that also works. The other possibility is you can use, it's a little stronger, you can use a little Mr. Clean Magic Eraser if you really want to. It's a little stronger, a little more scrubby. Just as long as you don't ruin the finish of the paper. You have to just do it very carefully. So, but in this petal I want this strong line to be removed a bit. Okay. It didn't do very much, it was a little bit. So that's, now I'm going to just let that sit and see how the color works, and I'll come back and do the final painting. Okay, I'm continuing my experiments. So I'm going to take some quinacridone red, which is basically a very nice transparent scarlet. And since this one tulip is so intensely yellow, I'm going to use red on that, and it's in the background because, of course, red and yellow make a bit of an orange. So I thought I won't put the opera on that one, but I think I'll try this. I'm still kind of assessing what colors. I like that. And I think I'll put that same red here. And it will be more of a red because there's less of the yellow over here. So I'll be able to also make this fairly transparent. So I'm just putting in some shapes. This is dry now. I can take that same red and come over here and just put in some color over the opera. And it'll give me a slightly different hue than the others because of the opera rose. So I'm just filling in some shapes at this point and with some transparent colors. And then we'll come in later and put in, I'm trying to avoid that stamen in the middle. Too much, too dark. A little more water. And now and then, when I went in and got some fresh paint, that's what happened. And of course I got some color on that stamen. Now in the background, what I want to do is take a little bit of orange and mix it in with that scarlet and just have a fairly loose amorphous shape back here of a tulip that I'm not planning at this time to detail, but just to indicate. And the same over here. There's, I'm just going to indicate that little mark there, that there's a tulip back here. Very subtle indication. Drop in some color here, loosely. And there's some flower that's going in back here. Again, I'll use the red, but since it's going in here, I need it to be a different color of red from the other two. So I'm bringing in a little bit of quinacridone fuchsia instead of the orange or the opera rose. And but you can if you don't have a wide range of these colors on your palette, I tend to have a lot of color. You can still mix it by just putting a little blue, a little cobalt blue in your scarlet. And if you only have like a cadmium red, you can use that too. Add a little cobalt blue to that if you're working with a limited palette. So just changing that a little bit, and that works pretty well. Over here I'm going to carry just a little bit of that into the shadow I'm not going to paint this tulip back here very carefully, but I'm just going to indicate its point a little bit and let it fall behind this other tulip. And there's a petal here that I'm going to fill in the color for that. It's a little darker, so I'm just going to indicate that. So this is moving along. That's not quite. I'm just going to fix that shape a little bit. I don't want it imposing on the other tulips. Okay. Let's see here. Of course, this will be probably the most important of the tulips. And I think what I'll do, rather than decide the color now, I'll go with a permanent rose. And then it can be adjusted. That way it's not too dark. And it's got some of the rose hue, but not quite as much as the opera rose. So I'm just basically putting in initial washes of that shape, of the shapes, and then later on we'll come in and detail shadows and some of those stamens in the center. So this exercise right now is to get a sense of the composition and the values. I think we've got one more petal back there. I'm going to have in the flower. It's a little bit behind. I don't want to fill this in completely, but just let it transition toward the center, and that way I can decide how to handle the center later. It also has a little bit of color on this side of the tulip, very light. I'm going to just show that very light. Whereas it's a little darker in here in the center of that petal. That petal wraps around. So I'll just show that so I remember to deal effectively with that later. The same with the this petal here, also wraps around, but it's already dark enough on the other side of the petal, I think. I would just put in a little bit, drop in a little bit of color to remember that there's a petal wrapped around there. And here, where it goes in behind. Okay, that's the beginning of this. And some of these shapes I'm going to leave very loose and not very defined, and others will get more definition. This petal here, I'm just going to show that there's a little bit of wrapping around in the same way where it cups around, that some of these do cup around, so I just want to indicate those and remember to deal with them effectively later. There is some kind of shape here. There is a flower there. I want to deal with that I think in the same basic color as here. Slightly different. I'm going to mix the permanent rose and the orange together to have a little deviation, bring in a little bit more. Just, it doesn't matter which colors I mix as long as they are each a little bit different, that they have enough similarity to be in the same family, the same kind of tulip, but that there's enough difference there that we can see that this is not just one great big blob of color in the center of the painting, but that these are different flowers. And on this one, I may take some of that color and bring it around and let that edge really get a bit lost. Okay? Yeah, that's what I want to do there. And then just, with water, just carry that down a little bit. Let's blend it in. So that's starting to come together. Now this is, for me, some people would keep working because they work a lot wet on wet and let all the colors blend together, but I like to give it a little bit of time and space. Over here, on this edge here, I think I might do the same thing. I'm going to come in with some of that same color on that edge and let some of that diffuse down into the background, and that kind of then blends a little bit with the original drippings in the background. And let some of that diffuse out, lose the edge. Oops, there was a little bit of dark paint on that, on my palette there. Don't want that. So here I am blending again, diffusing that edge a bit. Okay, and bringing some water in to let it spread in some places. Okay, this edge is getting a little bit messy because that's where I did some scrubbing and the paper was still a little bit wet. So I'll just clean up that edge a little bit. Okay, I think that's a reasonable start. This is going to be a very subtle array of colors, but as the flowers deepen and take on their shapes, I think that will all work out. I don't think I'll put a flower back there. Looking to see whether I would do that. I don't think so. I think I might just put in some mark since there is a mark from the pour there. I'm just going to put in a little bit of a mark, and that will not be detailed at all. It will just be an amorphous, blended in tulip back there. Kind of defined a bit by that mark that was in the original pour. going to put some water there and not have that so defined, but I'll leave this edge softened, but still an edge. These are subtle choices to make. There's no right or wrong. Just moving a little color around here and there. Okay, I think I know this here is wanting to be something. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of definition, but minimally. Yeah, you see what I mean? I think that's enough. Okay. We'll come back to that after it's all flattened down and not buckly anymore. And do some more work on it. Hope you're enjoying this. Well, this side of the paper you can probably see is still very bumpy and buckled because it's still quite wet. That's normal. So I don't want to do anything in there because the water will just puddle in those canyons. Those canyons. So what I'm going to do is do a little bit of work on the leaves. Just a small amount, a first cut. I'm going to take some cobalt blue and I'm going to add in some hooker's green. It's too bright. I know it's very bright, but then I'm going to add in a little bit of alizarin crimson. Yeah, and that's maybe a little bit more blue until I get a satisfactory green, a little more hookers. I want a slight green cast. Good. I think that's pretty good. I think you can tell what I'm looking for. Even though the tulip leaves are very kind of pea green, they don't really make for a nice painting from my point of view. So I'm just going to put in a first cut of some of these leaves. Often the tips of the leaves tend to curve. So I'm putting some into the vase of water that's below, leaving paint away from the rim of the glass. Let's see, here's I'll make and just as I did with the flowers, I'm going to distinguish the different leaves by bringing in slightly different colors. So now I'm bringing a little bit of Antwerp blue, mixing it in that. I think you can see I just mixed it in with the same mixture, but it's slightly different and it'll help so that the viewer, and also the different amounts of water in the mix will make a difference. But we want the leaves to be distinguishable from each other. I had already sketched in these leaves, so it's pretty straightforward to paint them. Now let's go for a little bit different color again. I think I'll go for a transparent red oxide, which is a wonderful, wonderful transparent color that is reddish brown. You see that? I'm going to bring that into this mixture here. And there you see, now we have another green entirely. So I'll use that on this. Here's a leaf here. And on that one, since it's coming out into the light, I'm going to bring in some of the other green that we just used on the tip. So it has a transition. I use a little bit of that. When you put the red into the green mixture, it makes a neutral, and that neutral therefore becomes can be made to be a dark. Some people just mix Prussian green and vermilion together in order to get a dark. So I'm going to put a few transitional darks in here with that color that I've just mixed, where I added the transparent red oxide. In fact, I can even just, down in the vase here, I can even just tone down the leaf behind the vase, which would happen by just glazing over a little bit with the transparent red oxide. Okay, now having a little trouble figuring out where some of my other leaves are. Pencil marks are deliberately subtle, but so subtle that I'm now going to have to make up the sense of leaves. Okay, so let's say I have a leaf here, which I think I may have actually had one right there. And I'll make it a little bit darker by adding less water. That's it. So I didn't make a new color, but I'm just taking some of the color that was on that little plate, and I blended them together and used less water, and then I suddenly have a much darker green. I'm going to lose the edge here and here, so that we don't have that defining space between them. Now let's see what kind of leaf we can put in now. I think I can take a little bit of olive green over here and see what that does. Yeah, that might be a little too green. I'll tone that down with some cascade, what's called cascade green. It's a dark green. And I think what I'll do is add a little bit of orange to that. Let's see how that works. That ought to tie in with the orange flowers to some extent. And just keep mixing your colors until you feel like you have something that's working for you. Okay, good. So I'll put in, now some of these leaves we won't be able to see. Let's see, where will we have some leaves? I think what I'll do is just indicate that there are some leaves back here, and by negative painting around the tulips. There should be, and doing it with a thin wash should indicate a little bit that there are leaves back there. I don't want to fill in all the spaces between the tulips, but I do want to indicate that there are some leaves between them. And that helps to also define that stem and this stem over here. And again, I'm just going to put in, I'm going to make up a leaf over here in the glass. I'm going to make sure I stay away from the rim of the glass. And I'll put some darker shapes down here in that space between the two other leaves. Yeah, okay, good. I think that's probably going to be enough for the leaves. I might put a very, very watery mixture behind this tulip here and behind its stem. There. And behind its stem here. And that's probably enough. No, I may have to go out a little bit more with another one. Just make up another one. This particular vase, sometimes I set up a still life, but in this particular vase, I didn't set up a still life. Instead, I took individual photos that I have of individual roses and decided how I wanted them to be together in a composition. So it's a little more, it's still based on real flowers, but not as they sit in a still life. I think this one, sorry I had to move that, but I've got to fix this leaf over here. It's got to go under the flower. Okay, and this is still all buckly. It's still all buckly, so we'll let it just do its thing. This didn't dry very evenly. I think that's because that was an area that I scrubbed a little bit. So I'll just dabble here and fix that a bit so that it's not so noticeable. Sometimes when you scrub a little bit, the paper becomes rough and the paint doesn't quite behave in the same way. But normally, they say watercolor is unforgiving. I don't find that to be true. It's certainly less forgiving. But there are so many ways that you can lift and scrub and cover and change, and even change your composition to cover an area that's not quite working because you've damaged the paper or something else. But there are so many ways to keep going, and you know, I talked to somebody who worked at the Isabella Gardner Museum, and he said that the Sargent paintings in watercolor were filled with scrubbing. You could see quite a lot of scrubbing that went on. And then we have a master painter here in the New York area who is, I read an article that was done in the Watercolor magazine last year, and he talked about all the scrubbing that he does until he finally gets to a painting that he likes. And there are some people that incorporate the scrubbing as part of their way of doing their painting, because it does just changes the texture, changes the definition of lines. And there's a lady who does repeated scrubbing in her work. I'm just going to put one more amorphous green shape down here with some space. And then the sides of the vase will be defined later. So this really has to settle down, flatten out, and then we'll come back and paint flowers. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Okay, I think we're ready for another phase. And I'm going to switch to a little flat brush to make marks that are kind of soft and have a little bit of a dry brush feel, even though I'm going to be using fairly wet paint. So I'm looking at this rose here in the background, and I'm thinking I need a little bit of a darker red and a little bit of an orange in that. So I'm going to mix together some alizarin crimson. And this is the palette where I have all my violets and reds. A little rose madder. I think you can see where I'm reaching, a little rose madder. I've had this palette organized in this way for about 15 years, and I just keep adding paint to it when I need to. And then sometimes I'll mix on a separate plate, but I'm trying to get a mixture that is a little darker than what is there. And so I'm making some rose madder and some alizarin crimson and a little bit of orange. It's like a Sennelier orange. Yeah, I kind of like that color. Let me just get a paper towel because it's a little too wet to put on the paper there. I just want to take a bit and start at the base of the flower and come up with some dry brush. Then I'll just take a little bit of alizarin crimson and put that in some of the deeper areas by itself. see, I might carry a little bit of it up. And then I'll take some of that in a watery way. And spread a little bit of it watered down up here behind this flower. I'm doing a little bit of negative painting on that. I don't have to be precise with all these flowers, but if I get a few of them right, I'm just moving that palette because I'm going to get my sleeve in it, which would not be good. Yeah, okay. I use the edge of my brush to just define the edge a little bit, bring a little bit of dry brush in here and there. I'm just going down in some damp water now and blending till I feel like I've got that the way I want it. Good. Now I'm going to come in with a small brush, a little number 2 small brush, and over here at the top where the petal turns around, I'm going to put a little bit of darker color around that. Again, take a little water and blend it. This one has another little place up here where the petal turns around. So I'm just painting on the underside of the petal. There are a few little petals here that have some detail. This is one of them. Others are not so important. But if I get 1 or 2 with some detail, then the others can be more loose. And then inside this one, and again, it's got some, I'll just do some negative painting around the curvature of the petal. I'm not going to add any more color to the curvature, just leave it lighter, but show some of the, show that it's lighter by doing this negative painting with the same color inside. And that will be probably enough for that. Okay. Okay, another one, this is a good color that I can use to carry down in this area here as well. To just intensify the shadow in the center of the flower. A little bit of that wrinkle there. And then in the same way with a dry brush, take a little bit of color from the edge of that paint and just carry it forward with a dry brush so that you can see these thin lines You see that? They're like the veins of the flower. And I don't want to show them in every flower, but if they're shown in a few places, then it creates a very nice clarity about the shape and nature of the flower. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add a little bit of, with another brush so I don't get that one dirty. I'm going to add a little more alizarin crimson to one part of that mixture to make it a little darker, but still in harmony. So on this bottom petal, I'm going to do that a little bit. This one will be a little bit darker. But again, I'm going to take it and dry brush it. So I'm just taking that very dry brush, putting a little paint in it, and then carrying the color up. You can see the texture through the dry brush. And in that one where it is a darker one, I'm going to, under the petal curves around, you may remember that. We had that petal curving around. So I'm going to use the darker color where I added a little more. And then blend that color in with some water, softening the edge and blending it in on the top there. It's not blending as well as I'd like. There. Okay, now take a little more and just define that petal. And down here, I'll put a little more intensity of color at the base of it. Same with over here, I'll put a little more intensity of color at the base of it. Okay, so I've got two petals that are working pretty well. And I'll take this lighter mixture and go around the edge of the petal where it had curved and is curving around. And this has a little bit of marks from the point of the petal and how it curves. And I'll leave it just like that. Not do too much more than that. A little bit of water to help it loosen that edge on the inside. Okay. Now I have a stem and another tulip coming in front of this one. So I'm just going to show that stem by painting around it and giving a little bit of shadow below that petal, below that tulip. That is kind of popping up between the petals. It's the kind of thing that perhaps I shouldn't have done, but I did do. Probably should have put it completely behind this petal, but I kind of liked it there, so I put it there. And just take a little bit of color to show that it's in shadow under this other tulip. Okay. The transition colors. Okay. Now I'm going to take some rose and put that in the mixture here and lighten it with a little bit of water. Because this petal is a little more in the light. So then I'll just dry brush a bit. And the brush is a little more wet at the beginning of the stroke, but then as I pull it out, you can see how it creates that texture. And again, that's a little more pink, and I'm just defining the petal a little bit, not very much, just a little bit. I have some reference photos of this tulip off to the side, but I'm not following them exactly, but just wanting to remember some of the key elements of the flower and how the petals overlap. Like this one is a little bit behind, and there's a vein in the middle, but I don't want to put too much detail on that. I just want to make sure that the color-wise, that some of the same color carries into that, so that everybody knows that it's part of this same tulip. Okay. And meanwhile, I'll put a little bit of the vein. There's like a little vein that comes down, a little indentation in the petal when it opens up like this. And at the base, the color is a little more intense because it's in shadow. It's not really that it's a darker, it's just that it's in shadow, so it's a little more intense. Yeah, there. And so I have one more to do, and there really isn't any reason for me to change the color from this one. So I'll just continue with that rose color and do the same thing. Kind of dry brush it out as a kind of dry brushed glaze over the flowers below. Okay. And a little bit of definition of the vein, which is the only really prominent feature in there. The vein and the change in color intensity based on shadows. So here it's curving over, so there's a little bit of a curve there. And at the same time, I'm going to outline the outside of the petal, and I'm going to show that maybe that little shadow in the corner here as it curves. Put a little bit of the darker red in this corner, again indicating that it's curving. I think that one's pretty close to being done. Up here, I think that there's some of the marks are going in the wrong direction. I want them to be more closely approximating the direction of the petal as it grows. There. So I'm trying to smooth that out a little bit, but still leaving that dry brush look. This one here, I like the fact that it's a pretty light flower. So I think I'm going to keep it in that light family. I have a, I think I might put a little bit of the opera pink. One of the benefits of having the palette like this is that I've been keeping my colors in the same places for so many years that I just know what all these little dabs of color are. So I'm just using the space between there's the hair there. I've got to pick it up. It's not mine, it's blonde. So whose it is, I don't know. Maybe it's a dog hair. With 5 dogs in the family, it could be. So I'm trying to, it's a little orangey, but it's pretty light. I'm going to put a little more opera rose in it. Yeah, I think that'll work. So again, I'm going to take a dry brush and be soft on shaping it. I don't want to have a lot of detail on this flower. Just I went a little over the size that I want that, so I just have to remove a little color here. Paper towel. Yeah. I'm defining a little bit the edge with that color. Yeah, I think that's good. I'm going to take a small brush with just water and make sure that this is blended with the water into the other color so there's no edge. I'm going to take that very light color and just make a few indications that there's some pointed, the petals coming together, that there's a bit of a point up there. I may use a little darker color for that. So by negative painting in the recess of the flower, where the points of the petals come together. Blend that. It doesn't do anything there. A little bit darker in the recesses. and that will be enough to, and little negative painting behind on this flower here, and that will be enough to define that flower. I'll go up with a small, very small, too dark, light, too dark, just a little bit of color to show the petal. A little too much. I really want to minimize detail in that flower. There's enough detail in the flower in front and in the flower behind. Yeah, just a little more. And for this one, I'm just taking any dark red on my palette directly, making a few marks to show that that petal curves over from my original sketch. That's the value of doing carefully some sketching ahead of time. Yeah, so that's good. And a little more definition here of this little cupping of the petal, because this also gives a sense of detail that if you have a couple of flowers where you show that, or even just a few petals, it's enough to have the viewer understand how the flower works. All right. Well, those three are coming along pretty nicely, I think. Nicely in terms of my expectations. Maybe not yours, but maybe I have low expectations. I don't know. I'm going to put a little vein in here. And a little more vein in there. A little more color intensity here. And it really doesn't matter which of the reds I grab for adding some color intensity, as long as they're in the basic family of what I've got mixed up there. So I'm not reaching for any brownish reds or violets at this point. Okay. I think we can, this flower here I'm going to leave, except for maybe a little bit of color in the inside of the flower, just a little bit. Yeah, I think that's, I don't think it's too much, and I think it's just enough to begin to give shape to that flower. Maybe too much, hope not. Maybe too much, I don't know. Just put a little water on that so it blends out. It's not a strong line. All right. This flower in the center, I love the way that pink and that yellow combined. So I'm going to stay in the pink family. That was the opera rose that we put on just to see how it would work. So I'm going to continue with that opera rose, putting some of it over here, but I'm going to add a little bit of quinacridone rose, which is a little different, not so neon rose, and I'll add a little rose madder, which is a little more brown rose, trying to get a color that is not orange but is not so neon. It's still pretty neon. Let me keep going. Still too pink. Yeah, that's starting to be in the right family. I just want to put a little bit, I don't want it, I love it the way it is, but I know if I leave that so conspicuously different in the center of the painting from the other flowers in terms of color and detail, that it'd be a distraction. But this is enough to keep some of the sense of that softness. I'm going to leave a bit of that yellow there. Now I'll come in with the smaller round brush and put some color in the center, as we did with the others, following my pencil marks. And take a little bit of fuchsia here and see if I can get a better color for the, yeah, add a little fuchsia here. A little more purpley central color here. That's better. I don't really want the bright opera rose type color in the center of this flower. So what I'm doing is a little negative painting in the center to show that the petals are coming together there. Here's one curving around. It's a little more detail than I planned, but I think it defines that flower a bit better, and it brings it into more similarity with the ones around it, so that it's not so, but I keep that nice yellow center that just worked out so well. Yeah, has a little different shape to it, just kind of nice where the petals go in. Haven't really curved around. Now I've got to put something here. Yes, there's a bit of green there from the leaf that was done before, but it's distracting, so I'm going to take a little bit of magenta and just and some water down here to lighten that up. I may have to scrub that little bit of green out, but for now I'll leave it there. And I'll bring a little bit more of that color we mixed into this area here. Good. I'll do the stems last, but I'm leaving the spaces for them. They tend to be very transparent and thin-skinned, and reflect a bit of the color of the flower and a bit of the color of the greenery. So each one will look a little different. Now over here where we had this being so orange, I'm going to take some more of that orange, and I'll take a little bit of scarlet and just mix that orange and scarlet together. I think that's a good color for that. So I'll get it pretty dry. Come in and do some dry brush in the same way. I'm not wanting to cover up too much of that yellow. I like it. Just bringing in a little bit more definition, a tiny bit, but not overdoing it, because it's really very pretty where the color of the flower is blending into the background. And so just I need to clean the brush and just blend in a little bit. Not do too much more than that. That's enough detail probably for that flower. I'm just going to put a little bit of a mark on top of the pencil line to indicate the vein, and maybe a little bit of, again, over the pencil line. I don't really like to see pencil lines by themselves without anything on them, with any paint on them. So I'll just cover up that pencil line and bring a little bit of shadow down here behind the other flower. But other than that, that flower is basically done. Tulips are really fun to do, I must say. I like this one to have a little more shape to it. I'm going to take the orange and just, I want a little bit of that petal to have some shape. Not going to do it the whole way, but just a little bit. And some little bit of shape here and there, a little bit more shadow. I think that'll work for that. In the center, maybe a little darker in here. Just another glaze of color, and that was the color that I had put a little bit of magenta. So that's good. And use that same magenta there. And it gives a nice contrast. Gives a nice contrast with the orange. I'm going to take a little bit of magenta for here, because that little bit of violet in the magenta makes that shadow a little more clearly defined. Yeah. There. And a little bit of that same magenta down here. I like the color contrast of it with the red and the orange. A few little accents. I'll put one small amount here. this here, the center of that, I'm going to take a little bit of magenta and a little bit of alizarin crimson. And I want to intensify this petal a little bit in the center with a little different color that is brighter. The color that's there is a little bit too much on the brown side for such an important flower in the composition. So cool it down with a little bit of this color. Because this really becomes, this flower, once I finish with the black on some of the central stems that are inside, the stamens and the pollen sacs inside this flower are black, so this flower needs a little shadow around that center to be able to support that very, very dark that's going to be there. And then that dark will make this flower the focal point flower. Just making a little bit of shadow here. Had the flower curve a bit. And these don't all have to be done dry brush. I just wanted to do some things dry brush to create some, like here, some visual diversity in the flowers. Okay. And that flower should actually be a little more flat on the bottom than it is there. Okay. So we're moving along. Yeah, we're moving along. Same thing. Just sometimes I just use what's on my brush for the value of what's on my brush. The level of darkness, the value, but sometimes I have to be very careful about what color it is. But so now the big question is this amorphous shape in here. That was a very violet kind of color. Let me see if I can do something with cobalt violet. Got a speck of dirt here. I'm going to change my paper towel. So this is the cobalt violet over here. You can see the little puddle here. Just put some water into the pan, and I don't freshen up these colors every time I use them, but just adding some water to them reconstitutes the color. So I want to put some of this color in there, and maybe with this, that might do it. Let's see. I'm thinking that mixture with some cobalt violet might be. Let's test it and see. Yes. See that? I hope you can see that that's a pretty harmonious color. A little more rose and red to bring it closer to what's happening with the other flowers, but a little more dark, But enough violet. I don't even know how I got that violet when I put it on last time, but anyway, enough violet to match what's there. All right, so it just got some texture there, and then put some darker parts in the area in the center where the petals come together. Here also there's a petal. So I'll just show a little bit the vein there and there. And I think that one is done. I could put a little bit of shadow on this side. It would also help. That might help. Blend that. I think that works. Don't want to do too much. That's enough detail. Just a little bit of color to show the I'm going to take, oddly enough, I know it's a very odd thing to do, but I'm going to take a little bit of that violet color and bring it over here and add it to this flower, just to harmonize the color a little bit, glazing over the much more orange flower to just pull it in. I like that one. I don't want to touch too much, but I think that pulls it in with this one here. I'm not quite ready to figure out what that is in the center there. There's time for that, so I'll just leave it for now. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to take a paper starting to buckle and be uneven. I need to think about this, and I need to think about this, because this is these two flowers are very, very important. I have to be careful about this one, because if I do it at the same level of detail as this one, then it will create kind of a back and forth of the eye movement. There should be one place in the painting where everything feeds down to that one place. And I'm pretty sure it should be this. So I have to think about how to handle this one so that it supports that, but yet does not distract from this. And the same with this goofy thing here. I have to figure out how I want to. And this one here, there's a little bit of a shape here that I could just leave like that, or I could accentuate it a tiny bit more. I'll probably just leave it. There's some pencil mark here that I either have to erase or do something with. I'll think about that too. So there's an area here, an area here, and an area here, and a little area here. And then there'll be the leaves to support things and the vase. As for the vase, I'll just take a tiny bit of cerulean blue right now and indicate the edge of that vase. and lay in a little color there, and here too. And lay in a little bit of color here. See how that became rather green because of the yellow below. But I did want to just define the basic dimensions of the vase. I think instead of cerulean, I'll try some cobalt, which is a little more blue. Or in fact, because of this green behavior, I think I'll go with a little more violet added to the blue. That would make more sense and give me a neutral for the edge of the vase that will not be looking like it's a stem out of place. That's better. Just go down with that. And I'll use that violet also up here on the edge of the top of the vase. I think what I'm going to do is bring in some Chinese white or titanium white to do something with that edge, because it shouldn't be yellow. So I'll modify that and sharpen that. But for now, this is a beginning with the violet, beginning to define the vase architecture. It's interesting how the violet does create more of a neutral. I'm putting the blue on, I'll put a little bit of, I'll come in and define those a little better, but there you have the beginning of a vase. And we might as well also, while we're at it, let's put some beginning of water. I suppose if I had planned this better, I would have. But, you know, it's a matter of, I just have to change the dimension a little bit, make that curve a little better. I didn't draw that in ahead of time. But I'll just put a little bit of that violet. Because where there's water, then it'll tone down the colors of the leaves that are in the leaves and the stems that are in the vase. And I have a plan for how I'll get some highlights in there a little bit later. So that's the beginning of the vase anyway. Sharpen up that edge later. Okay, I'm going to spend some time thinking about this area in support of this, and then maybe what I'll do is finish that flower when I come back so that we see how strong it is before finalizing what happens with these two. Okay, meanwhile, I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll let everything dry down and look at it under a few different lights to think about it. Sometimes I even hold it up to a mirror. Hold it up sometimes upside down to see how the composition works. There's a little bit of diffusion of color there that is not good. I'll just erase that now before I leave it. I think I'm liking that. I think I'm liking that. This is fine. I could have a touch, just a touch more orange in here. That's a little darker. Yeah, just a touch. Good. And here, a touch of a dark violet down here. Yeah. And a touch here. I've got to try to control myself, not overdo it. And a touch in here. So for that I just took a very Perylene violet, which is pretty dark. It has to be handled very carefully because it's very staining. You can't get it out once you put it in. So hopefully that's, yeah, I think that's better. A little more definition, not too much. The place with the big definition will be down in here next, and then we'll think about these other things. Then we'll do the stems and a little more, not definition of the leaves, but a little more brush stroke to make it so that they're not flat. You know, right now they're very flat colors. And so they need a bit of this kind of dry brush that's in some of these others to give them more life. Okay, I'll see you in a bit. Well, as my colors have been drying, I've noticed that one thing bothers me quite a bit, which is that my color saturation in the area of my focal point and my transitions are just boring. The painting has some nice qualities. I did take some mixture of Naples yellow and white and mix them half and half, and with a lot of water glazed over these colors in the back in order to blend them and have them soften. So I don't think I want to really do any more back here. I think that the fading back there is okay for me. When you blend the Naples yellow, which is a very warm, lovely, lovely yellow, when you blend the Naples yellow with the Chinese white, you do get, or the titanium white, they're both semi-transparent, and you do get a nice glaze that doesn't really give you a feeling of opacity. And even if you have to do a few highlights here and there like I did here, and you use the warm mixture of Naples yellow and white, you will not have that strong feeling of a white paint being slapped on for a highlight. So what I want to do now is figure out, when last we talked, I had put in some color here, softer black stamens, very vivid black stamens here, darker color here, but still there's, because of the yellow background, there's a lack of vivid saturation and diversity of color. So if I put on any more oranges or pinks, they're just going to keep blending with the yellow. So it's time for me to go to some reds that are more vivid and are not in that, with some of that yellow tonation. So let me see if I can find some that work for me. Yeah. Sometimes on my palette, I've had some of these colors for so long I forget what some of them are. But I'm going to just check a few. This one here, I think you can see where my brush is. Is that right? You can see? Yeah, let me put it. I'm going to move the tripod over on top of the board so you can see more of the palette. This one here has a very rosy quality to it, and it seems quite transparent. I forget what it is, but it's been there quite a while. But I'm going to really glaze this flower over with some of that, because I really need to perk up this painting. And maybe not for everybody's opinion, but for mine, I want a little more strength of color. I thought I would get it with what I put into the center, but it just didn't work. And I still want to respect some of the gradation in color of the petal as it turns around and curves on the outer edges. And maybe I'll even leave a little highlight in here and there from the color below. I'll lift a little color out here, and I'll lift a little here, and improve the transition here. Now see, on the palette, that's a very purpley color, but by putting it over that very orangey yellow mixture here, it's taking on a tone or hue that is more in the framework of alizarin crimson. But I don't want to go with the alizarin crimson because it has a tendency to be slightly brownish in its intensity, and given the nature of the underwash in yellow, I don't really want to have that. So this more purplish red is working better for me. It's a very, very, it's not quite a cobalt violet, which is more dull, much more dull. I'll have to look it up, but I don't know. But anyway, it's a very very nice, intense, and it's not a magenta. I'm not quite sure what the name of the color is. Some of these colors have been in here forever, and I don't necessarily, I tend to use a lot of what many people use are the basics, you know, the basics rather than the variations. But at a moment like this, I like to have the variations on my palette so that I don't have to spend time going and finding and trying different paints in the tube and taking them out, or mix. I could mix this color certainly with certain blues, but I don't want to keep fiddling with it when I've got a watercolor in motion and it's wet and I want to keep it going. So I prefer to have the colors handy. Yeah, I'm going to just leave a little bit of highlights like that. Again, I'm going to take some more of that. I'm taking it. Keep trying to get it a little more intense. Yeah, okay. I'm just wanting to make sure I have it plenty intense enough. I don't want to have to keep going over this with more and more layers. Hopefully this will be the last layer and that it will work. And then where it's more yellow in tone, I'll go over that with a softer rose where the petal turns. But for now, I'm just focusing on the main parts of the petal, and I'll deal with those other parts later, where it's curving around. I want to make sure I tend to that because this is the most important flower. Okay. I'm hoping that that will do it for me. Now I'm going to take an ordinary scarlet over here. You can see how scarlet and red that is. An ordinary, fairly transparent scarlet. And I'm going to go over, it's a warmer color. I'm going to go over this one here to intensify its color in front. I'm hoping that increasing the saturation, what they also call the chroma. I have to move this so that I can get my hand around it. Increasing the saturation of some of these flowers is going to work for me. So I'm not putting orange on here, but because the underlying base is so yellow, I'm still getting it. It's still looking very orangey, but that's okay. It's okay as long as I'm increasing the saturation of the color at this point. And some of the texture from below and the shading from below, I think, still shows through. I think that's a little better for me. This one here, I'm going to go with something in the pink family. I think just this, I think this is quinacridone pink. It's a lighter color than this other one that we tried, okay? I'm just going to put a bit of that and maybe bring in a little of that other color. I'm going to put a little bit of that over this flower. Again, it just needs more saturation. The painting is just too dull from my point of view. But I like the fact that we're getting quite a lot of gradation. We didn't have a lot of diversity in some of the flowers. This red is, oops, oh, I hate to drop water on the painting. Yeah, because when I do that, it tends to make a little bloom. Let's see if we can make it behave and not misbehave there. Oh, okay. This doesn't have enough diversity from the other flower behind it now, so I'm going to bring in a little bit of this color into the edge of that and into some sections of that while leaving the scarlet alone in some areas so that it doesn't look like an attachment to the other flower, but harmonizes with it enough and is different enough from that one. I enjoy using some of my base coats that I make out in the freezing weather, but sometimes they're a little hard to work with. That's all right. Just a little bit of a challenge, like a horse that doesn't really want to go out on the trail by itself and decides to be difficult. Okay, I think that's working a little bit better. The question is, do I put anything over some of these others? I think I'm probably going to have to put something over that one. And I think what I'll do is keep it in the same family, but just intensify the shadow a little bit with that same set of two colors that we were using so far. The rose and the sort of, they're both actually in the rose family, but one's more of a purpley rose and the other one's not. But I'm staying away from one, well, one's a scarlet and one's more of a rose. Or a purpley rose. Not quite sure what color that is. I have to check it out. Sometimes, you know, when they dry on the palette, you can't quite tell what they are until you wet them. Yeah, that's probably a little better. A little more consistency. Okay, and then as we go over here, I'm going to stick with the rose and this. I'm mixing the two together for that flower over there. That will tone down the orange. But not be really strong like this intense red. Yeah, that will work. That will tone down that between that purpley color and that rose, the two of them together will tone down the bit of orange looking to that flower, almost a brownish became, I don't know why, just doesn't have a nice keep to it. And I think what I'll do is come in and use a little bit of this color for, oops, I'm not on the stamen, some intensity, but not too much because I don't want it to take away from the other flower. But have it balance it enough so that it doesn't seem out of place. I'm just going to blend in some of this color, so it's a little more saturated in a few places and less so in others. Okay, I think that's working a little better. This little pointy thing here I need to blend so that it doesn't look like maybe it's a petal from the flower in front. It's not meant to do that. A little negative painting to show the tips of the petals of the flower in front. Just to accent the curvature of that little petal. The question is what to do with that. Okay. I've got a little bit of magenta. And a little bit of alizarin to mix together. So I'm pretty sure that what that color is there that I was confused about. It looks like I have it in two places. It's a magenta. So I'm mixing together some magenta and some alizarin, but it's an alizarin hue, not the original alizarin. So the mixture seems pretty compatible for me to put in here. So I'm going to do that. But with a fair amount of water. I don't want to over accentuate that flower. But it's looking a little too sick back there in this kind of purpley pallor that it had, and drained, like its face was drained, and saying, oh God, I'm not getting enough water, I'm hidden behind these other flowers, I'm really unhappy. Okay, and we'll perk you up a little bit. And that's a little better. I can take some of that same color and just put it down here at the base of this one. I'm still kind of loving, still very attached to that little yellow reflection from the undercoat, so I'm still leaving it. But sometimes I wonder if I should put a little bit of that accent over there and a little on that petal over there. Okay, this harmonizes a little bit better. I think those over there, I'm just going to leave. This one here could have a little bit of cobalt violet. I think, can you see that? You can't see it very well probably, but cobalt violet is, I don't know. If I took a little bit of cobalt violet and I put a little bit of that other color in with it, would that work? I think it would. I think it would work actually right here. And I think it would work actually right here. I'm not convinced that it would work there, but let me fiddle with it a little more. Let's see what could work there. Oh, this could work. Yeah, there's a wonderful color called quinacridone coral. This is quinacridone coral. I have it here in my palette. This is a color that we often use at the end of a portrait to glaze over some parts of the portrait with quinacridone coral. And then, yeah. And other parts that are in the bright light we glaze over with quinacridone gold. So yeah, just a little bit of that coral might be just enough to perk that up with plenty of water to spread it around. So it's not done too much. I don't want to have it done too much. And a little bit over here might not be a bad idea. The process of starting to increase the saturation of some flowers means others really do need a little bit of attention, and do a little bit here too. But I don't want to go up over that edge over there. And that same color might be just what we're needing over here. Just a little bit. I think so. Well, I'm happy with that. Now let's see how it dries, because that's always the test. Now, in terms of that was my red violet palette. I do the same for my blues and greens. Let's see what we can do to perk up. Got a clean plate. Keep these reds separate over here. Let me get a clean plate over here. Okay. And let's see what we can do with some blues to perk this up a little bit. I'm looking at this cobalt turquoise, and I'm wondering if it's too dangerous to put it in over some of these extremely dull leaves. Let's see, it might be, but I'm going to try one. I had already gone over the leaves to darken them and bring in a little bit of transparent red. That makes it just a little more vivid. I kind of like that. Let's see how it dries. I can't do the same thing with every leaf, but let me take that color and put into that color this wonderful manganese blue. These are John Pike palettes, and they come with a cover, and I got used to using them because I traveled a lot, spending anywhere from 2 to 6 months a year overseas up until 2 years ago, and working on sanitation in developing countries. And so I didn't really want to travel with tube paints because pressure of the cabin and the cargo area could really make a mess of them. I tend not to travel with much of anything that could leak and make a mess. That blue is kind of nice. I don't know how it'll dry, but a little bit there seems to help. At least while it's wet, it's looking a little better to me. I'm going to put a little bit on one side of that. but still leave the turquoise on the rest. As with all the glazes, the color below will come through. And I just put a little bit, carrying it down, but not much, because the color behind the glass is always less vivid. Okay, those are looking a little more interesting to me now. Another color that might work for creating some excitement is this Antwerp blue. It's like the Dutch. I think you can see it. Yeah, it's very vivid. I'm going to put that a bit here. See if we get a little more interesting color on that leaf by glazing over with that. And just under this shadow here, I think it might be a nice little perky color to take away the yellow brownish cast that's there now. To me, those leaves look a little happier now. I've got to do a little something with that one back there, and I think this ultramarine glaze might be just enough to, and then with a little bit of the turquoise. It will dry much duller and lighter than it looks right now, but might perk that up a little bit. Okay, now this one here is looking very sad by comparison. I have to do something that's compatible. I don't think I want to do the vivid green. Here is a teal, cobalt teal. Let's go for it. And I just blend it in. I don't want to overdo it, but I just want, and I don't want to put it on right next to the other leaf, but enough to blend in a little bit of that tone there. Good. And then in terms of the vase itself, the vase normally, the blue glass I think would be better off. Let's put quite a lot of water in this Antwerp blue. And I think a little bit of glazing with that will help to give the vase some bluish cast. That would probably be a good idea. It's turning green because of the yellow in the background. Well, that's what happens. Yeah, I know, but I did really want to use that. Okay, so we'll say it's sort of a greenish vase, and I put a little bit of shadow in here, not much, and a little bit of shadow in here. I don't really want the bright white areas there. So the last step, I think, that I'd like to do, this was my Naples yellow and white mixture. So I put a little more white on the same tray. Let me see if I can reconstitute some of the, I think you can see that, some of the Naples yellow. And look at that soft, buttery yellow. But I'm going to add more white because I just want a few reflections, and I want them a little more white than than the Naples yellow. So, but I don't want them crispy white. So I'm just trying to, let me take out my palette knife and just try to make that blend a little bit more. Scrape up some of the, yeah, I've had this palette knife since I was in college 100 years ago. Yeah, I used to paint it all the time with oils in my last couple of years of engineering school. And the school even included me in a couple of shows that they had in the student union. I was so excited. Not that I was anything terrific, but it was a very supportive environment. Okay, I'm just lightening this up with just the slightest amount of, just a few little much of this color will just absorb in and get lost, because that's what happens with when you put this is semi-transparent white on the painting. It just kind of fades in, but still that's okay. I just want a little lighter, so it's okay if it fades a bit. Just wanting a little bit of accents here and there on some of these petals that are turning around. Some of these little petals on the tips of them that are in the sun. I'm assuming there's some sunlight coming from the right and hitting some of these petals and putting a little bit of accent on them. Put some in the center of that yellow area. We can have a little bit on, even on this little sad flower behind. I shouldn't say that. You got to have some of the flowers just support the overall arrangement, and they aren't the stars of the show, but they're still important. Okay, here I'm just going to put a little bit here. Ever so, yeah, see, it just faded right in. These colors are just fading right in. It's not unusual. Sometimes if I really wanted a strong accent, I would take the white right out of the tube. But I don't want to do that. That isn't the nature of this painting, to have those kinds of super bright accents. So just a little bit here and there, like a little bit over here on this petal. And I've lost the white stamen, so I'll just put a little accent there. And a little bit on the stems. The stem tends to have a little bit of reflection on it. Here on the top of that. This brush is not as fine point as I should have probably used, but it's okay. It's putting the color on. Yep, see, it's already faded here. and a little bit on the glass. I could put more over here too, but I think I'm going to keep it over near the flower. That is so important in this combination of flowers. So I think that works a little better to emphasize the things that are in the light and also what's near this particular flower. I think that's about all I can really do on this. A little bit of color out of the boundaries there, so I'm just putting a little bit of the Naples yellow over it. I think that's about all I can do. But I do like it better than I did. I could darken up these stamens a little, but I think they might become a distraction. So, so this is it. I hope you enjoyed it. Take care.